एक आधे मिनट का लैग होता है। पांचू ने कर दिया लाइव। अब आ गया। एक ना वो होगा मेरा, चल कुछ मैसेज कुछ हुआ है ना, तो यही है। Hi guys, good afternoon everyone. We are meeting in the afternoon today. How is everyone today? Am I audible? If we can do a quick sound check. I hope the audio is loud and clear. I'm audible, I'm visible. We'll just check the slides as well. Right? Hi Rishita, hi Tanya, hi Good Simran, Smriti, Asta, Ranjan, Snehal, Asta. Good afternoon everyone. I'm just doing a quick audio and visual check so that everything is sorted before we get started. Great to have all of you here. Great to connect with you in the afternoon as well. Generally, I've done all my sessions post 7 p.m. So it's actually good to connect in the afternoon. I'm good. How are you, Ranjan? How are you doing? Great. We'll just wait for another couple of minutes. We'll let the others join in, right? And then we'll get started. Till that time, it'll be great if you can tell me which cities are you joining in from. I'm joining in from Chandigarh. So my wardrobe also suggests the same, right? There's a slight amount of chill left in the air. Otherwise, we are pretty sorted. Noida, Delhi, Jharkhand, first session, joining from Ranchi. Great, guys. Odisha, Nashik. Assam. Great, great to have all of you here today. And great to see everyone joining in from these diverse places. And yeah, I think Rajan, I took a session a couple of weeks back. I don't remember exactly. I think I had taken one session. So you'll keep seeing me every now and then. And you'll see me in different sessions for different things. So I'll be here. Great to connect with all of you. Great, guys. So great to have all of you here. And today afternoon, let's get started. First of all, a warm welcome to all of you to this session. I'm Prashant. As the name suggests, I'll give you a quick introduction of mine because for some of you, this would be the first time that you would be connecting with me. Quite a few of you, in fact, would be, this would be the first time that you would be interacting with me. So I am by qualification a graduate engineer, passed out way back in 2007. To you guys, that might seem like the Stone Age era, right? And been teaching since 2008 onwards, so 17 plus years I've been in this industry. I've taken CAT multiple times. VARC is a section that I'm most passionate about. It's the section that I've been training students in, and so I would like to share here. So my journey has been in the subject. It's been one which has been born out of love of the subject, right? Because engineering, as with most of us in this country, is a choice that was made for me, right? So I did that. I did enjoy my engineering days quite a lot, but post that shifted to language training, and that's what I've been doing. I'll use all my experience here with you guys today, and I'll try to keep the session as light as possible, as illustrative as possible, and with we'll try to have as many relevant details as possible as the title suggests, right? And we'll be focusing on CAT RCs, and we'll be focusing on the process of elimination. So our objective in today's session is outlined by this introductory slide itself, that the key criteria for us to take up is that we've got to solve RCs with that element of elimination. We've got to use our brains in a manner. We've got to get used to using logic with respect to solving RC questions. That's something that we will be doing today. Before we start with the first slide itself, I'll just explain the format of the class. There are a few concept slides, right? They are not too dense. For those concept slides, I'll highly recommend you guys to make some short notes, right? So make sure the important things that you learn is going to take probably one full A4 sheet, and you'll have sufficient notes from the class. So for those, for the concept section, make sure you make those notes. You have those ready for revision post the session, and then we will solve a series of questions. This is a session that we will approach through practice. This is not a session where it will be all theory, all gyan, all concepts. So I have around 20-21 questions in the slides. So we'll try to solve as many as possible, right? We have a long duration, so we'll go in a very relaxed manner. We don't want to burn ourselves out, right? We don't want to get tired as well. So we'll go in a relaxed manner. Along the way, at any relevant juncture, wherever you have doubts, wherever you have questions with respect to specific questions or concepts or things, how to implement them within within our topic, right? Our topic is reading comprehension, so we'll not stray off that, right? Within that, whatever you wish to ask me, you can ask me, right? You're most welcome to do so, right? We should have an element of humor as well in this. So for that, I'll depend upon you guys as well, that wherever you find anything worth discussing and you want to introduce the element of humor in the session, most welcome to do so, right? So let's keep it as interactive as possible. I want to hear as much as possible from you guys in the comment section. And for apologies in advance, I might not be able to read all the comments instantly, right? So if I miss your comment occasionally, it's just the restriction of the format, right? There are a lot of comments that come in. At times, I might skip the occasional one. So don't feel shy in repeating your comment and asking your doubts, right? So that's what we'll do. So are we ready to get started? Are we ready to get started? Asta, can we take up this question a little deeper into the session? I will explain neutral and objective, right? I will explain the differentiation between the two. but can we take this a little deeper into the session rather than right at the start? Right? You can definitely remind me if we have any such juncture where we discuss tones. So I'll definitely take it up. I'll definitely answer it for you. Right? Great. So how many of you have got experience with reading comprehensions? You've solved a few RCs, and how many of you have been facing some challenges with reading comprehensions? How many of you feel that यार फायदा तो है नहीं करने का, मतलब अभी कोई आके पढ़ाएगा, अभी ये this fat bald man is going to come, he's going to give some theory and पता नहीं वो applicable है भी कि नहीं है, आरसीज कैसे ठीक होंगे? कौन कौन है जो इस डिप्रेसिंग थॉट में से निकल रहा है? लगता है यार पता नहीं होगा कि नहीं होगा, थोड़ा सा डाउट है, थोड़ा सा डिप्रेशन है कि यार ये क्या चीज़ है. और कई लोग ये भी सोच रहे होंगे, सम ऑफ यू माइट बी थिंकिंग दैट व्हाई डू दे मेक अस रीड सो मच कंटेंट एज वेल, राइट? व्हाई सच थिंग्स? So if you guys are going through these, if you have these questions or these doubts or this particular, it's a thread of thought that you have in your minds. So if you have this thread of thought, we'll try to alter your thinking just a little, one tiny smidgen, right? Thoda alteration hamesha should be done. Modifications, improvements should be done in small amounts, so that they are sustainable. So that's something that we'll be doing. Chalo, let's get started. Great to see you guys responding, you guys talking to me, right? So we will have, I believe we'll have a really, really fruitful session today. I think we'll have a deeply interactive session. What is this session all about? What is elimination of options all about? Why does the need arise? Why do we need to eliminate options? Why can't we select answer choices? Right? The first particular thing which I wish to discuss here with you guys is, in general, and this happens with the majority of us, right? This particular aspect, when we go about solving RCs, right? In general, the process of solving any reading comprehension is for most people. So let's assume this is the RC. You've read the RC, and there are, let's suppose there are 3 or 4 questions based on it, right? Now, generally what will happen is you guys will read the RC, you will try to, absolutely Neha, that's also a very relevant question. So I'll take that up as well, right? In fact, there is a specific slide that will come in where I'll explain how to summarize an article. So RCs, we've got 3 or 4 questions for it. The general approach that most of us have while solving RCs is, we read the passage, we read the questions. Now these questions, obviously each question has 4 answer choices, right? When we read the answer choices, from one of these answer choices, you will get a feeling. Okay? And is feeling ka naam, agar if when I ask most of my students, right, why did you choose this particular option? जैसे फीलिंग आई थी, पहला आंसर, वो फीलिंग क्या आई थी, वो फीलिंग क्या थी? आंसर उसका होता है कि यार ये ऑप्शन ना अच्छा लगा था हमें. सो हमारी जो रीजनिंग है आरसीज के अंदर, ऑन अ लॉट ऑफ ओकेशंस, इट एक्चुअली ब्रेक्स डाउन टू द बेसिक ह्यूमन इमोशन ऑफ गुड और बैड, या ये हिंदी में ज़्यादा इम्पैक्ट होता है इसका, अच्छा या बुरा. हमने ये ऑप्शन सिलेक्ट करा, फीलिंग आई थी ये ऑप्शन अच्छी लगी, ठीक है, तो हमने सिलेक्ट कर ली, ठीक है, अच्छा लग रहा था, पढ़ने में अच्छा लग रहा था, मतलब लगा मुझे लगा ये है, ठीक है. एक और बहुत कॉमन आंसर है, आई फेल्ट दिस इज द आंसर, राइट? सो योर डिसीजन मेकिंग इन रीडिंग कॉम्प्रिहेंशंस, राइट, ऑन अ लॉट ऑफ ओकेजन्स, it just breaks down to, right, the bottom line is, you get a feeling from the answer choice, you select it. If a gun is put to your head, imagine this hypothetical scenario, right? We are living in the world of South Indian movies where a gun is put to your head and you are asked to answer, क्यों select किया था, ये आंसर क्यों select किया था, उसका आंसर ये होगा, फीलिंग आई थी, अच्छा लगा था, right? So अगर आप ऐसे कर रहे हो सवाल solve, if you are solving RC questions like this, then the way you are solving RC questions is you are solving them on the basis of gut feel, right? So this is a gut-based approach of solving RC questions, right? Now, over a period of, yes, this is completely Smriti, a subjective way of doing it, right? So over a period of time, you've got to train yourself into identifying, right, that the fact of the matter here is we should not only be selecting the right choice, right? How do you reduce, the question is, how do we reduce this gut feeling, right? There is no human way you will be able to eliminate it. Each one of us would, for some questions, still go back to our gut feeling where we are not really able to differentiate between the answer choices. 2-3 सवाल में होगा, नहीं 100% eliminate हो सकता. But majority of the cases may, what you can do is you can reduce this gut feel by elimination. This is where the process of elimination comes into the picture. If there are, just clearing the slide. So now when you see 4 options, right? Among these 4 options, when you see these 4 options, it's not about selecting option number B as the correct answer. No. Your job is to reject A, C, and D, right? So there you are not selecting answers, you are eliminating answer choices. The moment you start to eliminate answer choices, the basic human way of doing things, right, our human reasoning, it kicks in. It forces us to think. This process forces us to think, it forces us to reason, it forces us to ask, why is this particular option correct or incorrect, right? It forces you to do that. And that is the ideal state we want to reach, right? Next thing, is this state of eliminating answer choices, is this way of solving questions, is this, right? Is this instinctual in nature? Is this something that you will be able to do instantly? Is there a switch in you where you tell yourself to do this and you'll be instantly be able to do this? No. We won't be able to change our question solving patterns instantly. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some element of pushing yourself to do this and getting into the habit of doing it. Hence, this is something that has to be put into practice, right? So before we do it in the actual mock scenarios, we've got to do it with practice when we solve RCs. So that's why we learn elimination, and that is why we are discussing the art of elimination today. That's the backdrop of doing this. Why are we doing this, right? Rishita's question here is, isn't gut feeling also somewhere related to us inferring an answer, right? When we choose, when we go by our gut feeling, when we select our answer, right, we probably, what we do is we miss out on the finer points, right? And we don't quite look at, right, the finer distinctions that we want, should be looking at, right? We somehow, somewhere or the other, we miss out on details when we select, right, answers. So there is an element of detailing that we miss out on. And what happens, Rishita, then is that when you eliminate answer choices, you ask yourselves reasons. Why is this incorrect? There you might actually spot, oh, actually on first glance I was ruling out C, but actually C comparatively is a better choice than B, right? When you start to think deeper about reasons. And that's how elimination helps you improve your accuracy. So that's the process. That's what we are trying to do, right? So I hope you guys now, can I call this the backdrop of why should we take up elimination? This is the backdrop. All of you agree with me that this is, this makes sense? That so far, this is making sense? All in agreement with me? Chalo, next slide, next concept, right? Now that we've kind of arrived at this juncture where you guys and you and me are in agreement with each other that elimination is something that we should take up and we should do, right? The next thing that becomes important here is that how do we eliminate answer choices? How do we go about this process? What should be the method of elimination? Agreed? So that's the next obvious logical step. Part one is why should we do it? We are sold on that, so we've decided to do it. Now, how should we do it? Right? So that's a 3-step process, right? The first thing that we understand here is there are 2 types of questions that you get, right, with RCs. That's what you are dealing with in general. If you categorize all the different questions that you have in reading comprehensions into 2 broad categories, you have one, the big picture questions, right? These are awesome questions, right? Why are they awesome? Because they don't ask you to focus on specific parts of the passage, overall understanding. You should be able to solve these questions. Big picture is what is the main idea of the passage, tone of the passage, primary purpose of the author of the passage, author's profession, author's organization, passages, organization or structure, questions which are based on overall detail. The most common out of these are main idea, primary purpose, tone, author profession, even title of the passage, right? So these are your big picture questions, right? Then on the other hand, you have specific detail questions, right? These might be factual in nature, where they'll ask you to check whether something is correct as per the information given in the passage. Next, inference-based questions. Next, questions which are based on the views of the author, whether the author would agree or disagree with something. Then you go into specific parts of the passage, whether something is true, whether something is false as per the information given in the passage, so on and so forth. With all these questions, you can see with the specific detail questions, you need to go and read closely, and you need to go and refer to the specific parts of the passage to arrive at the answer. So the degree of detail, it keeps pushing you to go into that direction. Process of elimination would be far more, it's applicable in both these types of questions, but the second type of questions is where you'll really need them, right? So those are the 2 types of questions that you're faced with. Now, the next part for you guys, right? One thing that you should write it down as a mental note for yourself going forward in your CAT prep is, please do not ignore the question statement, right? Especially CAT in the last few years has started adding except at the end of the question problem statement. That in itself creates a problem, right? You've got double negatives as well in question statements. Plus, there are on occasion some very fine details, right? In fact, we've got a couple of questions here today where you'll see that by not interpreting the question statement correctly, right? Simply by not interpreting the question statement correctly, you got the answer wrong, right? Because the question asked something else, you picked up another option which was true as per the passage, but it just did not answer the given question, right? So as a thumb rule for yourself, make sure that every time you solve RC, you'll just spend an extra second to make sure you've understood the question, right? Next, we get down to step number 3, where we eliminate answer choices, right? That's what we do. Now, I've spoken a lot about elimination of answer choices. The obvious question here is, are there a set of rules, right? Or rather than rules, would all of you agree using the word rules in the VRC section is very risky? Would all of you agree with that? Outside of grammar. So would you agree? Using the word rules is a pretty risky thing to do. Because language is such a funny beast, right? That I'll give you a rule today and tomorrow there would be an exception to it. Somewhere that rule would not be followed, right? There would be specific reasons for that, but that is something that can happen for sure, right? So that's something that we've got to be really careful with. So we will take the following set of, on the following slides, we'll take these as guiding principles, right? So these are just markers for us that we can use for eliminating answer choices. While we'll be studying these markers, I have done one very simple exercise, one very simple thing with these slides. I have put in example statements, right? Wherein I have tried to explain with those example statements the correct and the incorrect form, or what kind of error is being committed, right? So basically we'll be covering different types of errors that are committed in answer choices, right? Are these the only types of errors which are committed while creating incorrect answer choices? No, but these cover a wide majority of them. So let's study these different types of error statements that we have. So just explaining what do I mean by error statements, you've got 4 different options, right? So within these options, the incorrect answer choices, the question setters, they have a few tools in their hands, right? Wherein they can use these things to introduce errors in statements, right? By introducing few of these things, they alter the meaning of the statements. When they alter the meaning of the statements, there is a very subtle change in the meaning of the statement, which leads to the creation of the error, right? So that's something that happens. So let's go through these. Different types of errors which are introduced in answer choices one by one, and we'll try to understand these. And this is where you start making notes. You should have already started making notes, right? You should have noted down a couple of important points so far. This is where you note down all the 6 different types of errors so that you can keep this as a ready reckoner of sorts for future revision whenever you eliminate answer choices in RCs, right? These are the different types of errors that you can be careful about, right? So first type of error that we have in answer choices is the scope trap, right? So what is the scope trap, right? Imagine, right? Absolutely, Atharv. Comprehensions are super boring, right? So one of the things with comprehensions being boring is that for anyone, right? My first real recommendation for you guys is that if you're suffering from boredom in reading, right? So personally speaking, I don't suffer from boredom in reading because reading is something that I love to do the most in life, right? So if there is a hobby or an interest, in fact, I regard reading almost as a skill of mine, right? It's a skill rather than an interest as well. So I find it super interesting. I literally can read almost anything in the world, but I find that very interesting, right? That's something that I find reading to be, and I find it to be relaxing. I find it to be deeply enriching, motivates me, etc., etc. But you've got to, if you are finding reading comprehensions boring, the first step to fixing that is try to read from your interest areas. Try to develop simple सा फंडा यार, सिटिंग कैपेसिटी ना. और आज की डेट में ना, इस दुनिया में, मतलब मेरे को अगर तुम एक चीज़ पूछोगे जिसने मेरे हिसाब से दुनिया को बर्बाद किया ना, यहाँ पे रील्स एंड शॉर्ट्स हैव अ ह्यूज रोल टू प्ले. इंस्टा ने स्पेशली, attention spans, social media in general started with Facebook years back, and then we've had Instagram, we've got at some point of time WhatsApp is also actually very distracting, right? So all these different social media platforms, right, and these continuous distractions, essentially the smartphone, right, continuously keeps pinging. These have really reduced our attention spans, and they make it really tough for us to focus and read. So hence, for you guys, anyone starting out who's finding RCs boring, discover, for example, it might be sports or technology, might be your area which you really love to read. Read great content in that, right? You will have tech magazines which write opinion articles, sports magazines which have opinion articles written by high quality authors. So go ahead and read those, right? So search for opinion based articles, editorials in areas and fields that you like, and from there build your ability to sit and read, right? The first is you have to develop a sitting capacity. When you develop a sitting capacity, then you develop a capacity to solve RCs as well. So it works in conjunction, right? That's something that you can do. As far as RCs go, in the session that I had a couple of weeks back, I had outlined the same thing. Your first target should be solving at least 1 RC a day. Get into that habit, right? सोना नहीं है भाई, जब तक एक सॉल्व नहीं हुआ ना, सोना नहीं है. अपने आप को बोलना है यार कम से कम एक तो सॉल्व करूंगा, राइट? सो एक सॉल्व करो, फिर वहां से बिल्ड करो, ठीक है, अपना मोमेंटम, ठीक है. छोटे स्मॉल बेस से स्टार्ट करना है, बहुत ज्यादा टारगेट नहीं रखने खुद के लिए. एक आरसी एक आर्टिकल शुरू कर लो, हैबिट बना लो. जब हैबिट बन जाए तो 1 से 2 पे जाओ, 2 से 3 पे जाओ. पर अभी के लिए हर रोज का एक, आज का एक नहीं, हर रोज का एक। देखो यार 10 दिन 21 दिन लगते हैं, वो एक क्लीशेड लाइन है, 21 दिन लगते हैं हैबिट बनने में। 21 दिन तक हैबिट तो बनाओ पहले, ठीक है। तो पहला ट्रैप, कमिंग बैक टू द स्लाइड, जो हम लोग फेस करते हैं वो है स्कोप ट्रैप, ठीक है। स्कोप ट्रैप क्या होता है? सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल देर इज अ पैसेज विच माइट बी टॉकिंग अबाउट पोल्यूशन और AQI वैसे ही पिछले 2 दिन से वी हैड दैट billionaire leaving Kamat's podcast, right? So AQI is in discussion. So there might be a article which is based on the pollution, air pollution in India, right? And the answer choices might talk about the subcontinent or Asia, right? Very subtle change. In fact, they won't even talk about Asia. They might talk about subcontinent in general, right? Might include our neighboring countries as well, right? Might be an extension, might be a subtle extension, whereas there is no evidence of that, right? So there, right, that is how scope is changed, right? Where you subtly, the whole option would be correct, right? But the subject which is being spoken about would be subtly changed, right? So for example, the original text was focused on urban schools in Delhi. The conclusion or your answer choice was based on the education system across India, right? So from one, एक चीज वैसे ही रखना, हमेशा याद रखना, छोटे सेट से बड़े सेट पे नहीं जा सकते, ये लॉजिक में गलती है, ठीक है। और VRC में ये ट्रैप होता है, आप छोटे मेंशन को करके, छोटी चीज मेंशन करके बड़ी चीज पे चले जाते हो, ठीक है। तो वहां पे आपने क्या बेसिकली वायलेट किया? आपने स्कोप ऑफ द पैसेज वायलेट किया। अब अगला क्वेश्चन, स्कोप ऑफ द पैसेज कैसे डिसाइड करोगे तुम? स्कोप ऑफ द पैसेज तुम्हारा है पैसेज का सब्जेक्ट क्या है। सारे लोग समझते हैं सब्जेक्ट क्या है, क्या होता है पैसेज का, किस एक या दो चीजों के बारे में पैसेज में मेन बात हो रही है, राइट? तुम्हारा स्कोप ऑफ द पैसेज इज पैसेज में मेन चीजों किसके बारे में बात हो रही है। एज ए रूल while reading, right, there is one another technique. Anvisha, you are right, that does happen, right? Now trying to make your lives a little easier, because मैं parallel tracks पे कोशिश करूंगा तुम्हारे questions को आंसर करने का, और this would help अथर्व you also, that अपने आप को ना रीड करते वक्त आरसी के क्वेश्चन तो हमने सॉल्व करने ही करने। एंड देयर वाज अ स्टूडेंट, आई हैव फॉरगॉटन हर नेम, जिसने शुरू में पूछा था कि आर्टिकल्स को एनालाइज कैसे करते हैं, ठीक है। सो अगर मैं अपने आप को, है ना, एक सिंपल सा फंडा बोल दूं कि पढ़ते वक्त मुझे कुछ की चीज़ें पैसेज के अंदर हमेशा ढूंढनी है, ठीक है। हम आज की क्लास के एंड तक वो सारी की चीज़ें लिखेंगे क्या क्या है। उन की चीज़ों में से, है ना, कोई भी आर्टिकल पढ़ो तुम, कोई भी आरसी सॉल्व करो, तुम्हारे को ये क्वेश्चन नहीं है आरसी के अंदर कि सब्जेक्ट क्या था पैसेज का, पर तुमने हमेशा अपने आप को पूछना है व्हाइल रीडिंग कि मुझे पता होना चाहिए ये किस सब्जेक्ट के बारे में है, बिकॉज उस सब्जेक्ट की एप्लीकेशन कहाँ पे हो रही है, स्कोप ट्रैप पे हो रही है। सटनली ऑल्टर करा जा रहा है आंसर चॉइसेस को। सो पहली चीज, सब्जेक्ट ऑफ द पैसेज, किस मुद्दे के बारे में पैसेज है तुम आइडेंटिफाई करोगे। सो दैट्स थिंग नंबर 1। थिंग नंबर 2, एक्सट्रीम आंसर चॉइसेस, राइट। हम लोग sure Pawan, I'll keep both languages, right? I'll primarily focus on English, but a little bit of Hindi here. Whenever I explain something in Hindi, I'll explain it in English as well. Next thing is extreme language traps. What are extreme language traps? Extreme language traps are where you subtly change the option and you introduce things such as always, never, only, all in these answer choices. So giving you illustrations of these two sentences, two statements, how the original line has been or original sentiment has been edited. Studies suggest coffee helps reduce drowsiness, right? Deceptive answer choice, coffee is the only solution to prevent sleepiness. So how did we make it extreme in nature, right? By adding an only to it. Similarly, most elephants in this region migrate, all elephants migrate in summers, right? So you changed most to all. Both these example statements Would you guys agree with me that the moment I introduced only and all in these two statements, they kind of became very strong opinions? So all of a sudden it feels like you're reading very strong opinions, right? आप almost एक judgment pass कर रहे हो कि ऐसा ही होता है. This is how it is. You are passing a judgment that this is how it is, this is how it goes. Would you agree with me that by using these extreme words, this is what we've done? Yes or no? So this is a marker for you guys. You should note it down. Whenever you have extreme words, you have absolute words. The only exception to this is they should be directly stated in the passage. The passage should directly state that coffee is the only solution to prevent sleepiness, right? And you would be fascinated by it that 99.9% of the authors in the world, go ahead and read all the editorials in the world, you will see that most authors don't use such extreme language, right? Most of them in the world don't use extreme language. Everyone, right? Because their degree of certainty to say this, unless and until it's a mathematical fact, 1 + 1 = 2, there is no way you can be sure about it, right? There would always be that element where shayad ye na ho. Hence, this becomes very difficult. So this is the second thing, that second trap that you will search today in answer choices. You will see where extreme words are used. You will use this as a method of eliminating answer choices, right? Second thing that you learn. Third thing that you learn, partial truth traps, right? So what is a partial truth trap? In this case, you are given, you use correct information from the passage, or you use some content from the passage. Either you omit something, or you edit something, or you make this small little change in the original content of the passage, and hence that statement becomes partially true, right? So what happens when you read a partially true statement as an answer choice in RCs, right? Our brain, remember the same brain which was selecting answer choices in the first go, what happens is it reads something which is partially true, and our brain tells you, "Arey ye to padha tha, I had read this. Oh, I had read this fact in the passage. This seems familiar." So partial truths, they have this inherent psychological bias. They create this inherent psychological bias in you, where they try to attract you, right? So it's almost as if someone is trying to attract you, tempt you. So this is the I'm not sure I should be using this, but since we decided that we will have shots at humor in the class, so this is the partial truth options are, I hope most of you understand this, is the exam setter's way of honey trapping you, right? So you have honey traps out there in the real world. So this is the exam setter's way of honey trapping you in the exam, where they'll give you something which looks very, very familiar, very, very similar to the text, and you're like, oh God, we're trapped now, right? So that's something that they do. A couple of examples, right? The medicine is effective against bacteria when combined with proper diet. The medicine is one of the successful cures for bacterial infections, right? Now, if you look at these two statements, right? If you look at the deceptive choice, that's actually correct, right? There is an element of truth in it, right? When I say correct, that means it has an element of truth in it. But what does this choice do? It misses out the fact that there is a condition attached with proper diet. Can you see the subtle change between these two statements? Can you guys see the beauty in these two statements? Well, this is like a beautiful example. Probably the best one we've had so far. Can you see the subtle beauty? The medicine was effective against bacteria, right? But there was a condition attached when combined with proper diet, right? Our deceptive choice kind of omitted it, right? It just omitted one small element of it and it just altered the meaning. Now, if you are not careful enough in the exam, right, you might be tempted to choose this, right? Imagine under that exam pressure, under that stress where you are trying to finish the exam, you might be tempted to select such an answer choice. Similarly, in controlled environments, the experiment showed positive results. Researchers caution that real-world applications may vary significantly based on environmental factors. So in controlled environments, that is in a testing environment where all the parameters are controlled, the experiment was positive. Real world, there is a doubt. That is what the original statement says. Deceptive choice 1. The experiment showed positive results, which is correct, indicating its readiness for real world implementation. So now there is a subtle alteration. We actually don't know whether it is ready for the real world or not, right? Because real world applications, they might vary. So its readiness is something that we cannot decide. In fact, there are doubts with respect to its real world readiness. Or something like researchers found positive experimental results suggesting consistent performance across settings. Again, this omits very conveniently the reference to real world settings, right? So we don't know when he refers to these settings, is he talking about real world settings or not, right? So you can see that partial truth traps, can I call them errors of omission? These are very clever omissions by the exam setter, right? Very, very clever omissions in statements, very clever traps, subtle changes. Rishita's doubt is that it mentions one of the successfuls. It says the medicine is effective against bacteria when combined with proper diet. The medicine, Rishita, is effective when it is combined, right? So when the medicine is combined with proper diet, right? So the medicine is one of the successful cures for bacterial infections, right? That is partially correct. It is, right? So that is what I'm saying. That statement is partially correct. But what is it that statement should have carried? The medicine accompanied with proper diet is one of the successful cures. So let me put it this way. What is the cure? Is the medicine alone the cure? Or medicine plus proper diet is the cure? The medicine is effective when given with proper diet, right? Now, when it is not given with proper diet, we just don't know what happens. We are actually not even told that, right? So there is an element of doubt which has been left there in the statement. So this statement is saying medicine plus proper diet effective, a tick mark, right? So that's, both are required in this case. The deceptive choice skips on that part. So that's where we've got to be really, really careful. So understood partial truth traps? Next is out of context distortions, right? Where you change the context itself. It's a extension of partial truth traps, where we just distort the content which is given. We just alter the content itself and distort the meaning itself, right? So for example, you would have a context such as, while digital streaming has reduced CD sales globally, vinyl records have seen a revival among audiophiles. Who's an audiophile? Quick vocabulary question. I hope all of you have seen vinyl records, those old records, music records that used to come. They have their own separate fan base. People still listen to records, right? So who's an audiophile? Quick vocab question. We can actually derive the meaning from the context itself. Audiophile. Who's an audiophile? So if we combine the words audio and file, what do we arrive at? Yes, Siddharth, there will be an element of grammar. Grammar here, more than the rules of grammar, sentence structures, understanding of sentence structures. Someone who's very interested. Someone who, file is the root word for love, right? So an audiophile becomes a lover of audio, right? Who would be a lover of audio? Someone who really loves music, right? Who has a love for sound and music, right? So that's what an audiophile is. Someone who's very interested in music, audio, sounds in general. Basically, in this context, it's someone who's genuinely interested in music. So now, while digital streaming has reduced CD sales globally, vinyl records have seen a revival among audiophiles seeking premium sound quality. Deceptive choice here is, which is an incorrect, it's a distortion of the given information, right? The decline in CD sales has directly caused the increase in vinyl record popularity. Is this correct to say? What is the correct relationship here? What should have been stated? Should we have stated that the decline in CD sales has directly caused the increase in vinyl record popularity? What should we have actually stated? Are people buying vinyl records because they are not buying CDs? Because this deceptive choice is basically saying that since people are not buying CDs anymore, or there is a decline in CD sales, hence there is an increase in vinyl record sales. What is the problem with this? What was the actual cause for this? The actual cause for this was digital streaming, right? It wasn't these CD sales. CD sales fell because of digital streaming came into the picture, right? Vinyl records have seen revival among premium audiophiles seeking premium sound quality, right? So the people who are seeking vinyl records, it's not because can I say this? Are vinyl records replacing CDs? Are they a replacement for CDs? They are actually not a replacement for CDs, right? People don't want to listen to the songs digitally, the audiophiles. So that category of people, they are going back to buying vinyl records, right? So the deceptive answer choice, it just changed the causation. It just mixed up the cause and effect relationship here. So there was a mix up in causation which was done in this particular case, right? So there is a subtle change, right? One more subtle change that we generally have is we have these logical fallacies which come into the picture. Which are logical fallacies? These logical fallacies you should as something that you should follow up on, right? You can, I think taking screenshots, Himang, would be the best way out, right? So for enabling you to take out screenshots of this presentation, the best thing I can do for you is I can move my fat frame out of the screen, right? So that will give you a clear screenshot. So you won't have to screenshot me. So now it's absolutely clear. You can screenshot it. So now logical fallacies. Sure, the previous slide as well. Is there a doubt, Asta? Or you want to? Lina, if you want to crack CAT without solving RCs, it's going to be very, very difficult. Because RCs form the bulk of the CAT section, right? So it's like 16 out of 24 questions, right? So there it becomes very, very important. You won't be able to crack the exam without solving RCs. Logical fallacies, these are logical mistakes which are made, right? In the it's almost 66% of the exam, 2/3, 16 out of 24 questions, right? So you would have these different kinds of logical fallacies made. So I put up 3 kinds of logical fallacies here. Logical fallacies are something that you study in a topic such as critical reasoning as well. So whenever you study critical reasoning, guys, whenever whenever in the course that you will study critical reasoning, make sure you give a lot of attention to it, right? Because critical reasoning also has a huge impact in improving your reasoning skills, right? More than direct questions in the CAT exam, we don't have direct CR, we have them in ZAT and NMAT mostly, but it has a huge impact in improving your reasoning. It helps you spot logic, right? Which is something that you should be focused on. Lina, over a period of time, you improve your English skills, you improve them in small baby steps. You cannot give up, right? We cannot think that our English is not good today, so we'll not be able to crack the exam. Small baby steps, small micro improvements, right? That is something that you do. So there are these 3 different kinds of logical fallacies that I put up on the board. I'll explain these to you. So first is a false analogy. An analogy is a parallel comparison with something, right? So what is a parallel example or a parallel analogy? Like a computer processor, so there is a comparison, the human brain processes information using electrical signals, right? So there, in this particular case, what has the human brain been compared to? It has been compared to that of a computer processor. So there is a analogy that has been created here. The deceptive conclusion, since computers need regular shutdowns, humans must also need sleep 8 hours daily. So that's a comparison which is based on this, right? So that's not necessarily true. For humans requiring sleep, there might be hundreds of other factors, right? So to say that a false analogy basically is, if something is similar to something in one aspect, it should be similar in all other aspects, right? So basically, if A and B are similar in one aspect, you imply they should be similar in all other aspects. Not necessarily true. 2 hours reading daily, absolutely, Manish. If you read 2 hours on a regular basis, the challenge there is going to be finding those 2 hours on a regular basis. Let's say if you're able to do that, it is over a period of time. So the simple rule of thumb for me in life is that the impact of reading on RCs is, there is a compounding impact, right? The more you read, the better you get at it, the greater the impact. With every subsequent sitting that you have, there is a compounding impact, right? Your brain gets used to taking in more and more of that information. Reading is, to the mind, indulging in a really popular cliche, right? Reading is to the mind is what is exercise or going to the gym is to the body, right? Faulty generalization, right? You guys should be able to see the error in this one very easily. 3 startups in Silicon Valley achieved unicorn status using this business model. Whichever business model, they became unicorns. Startups can become unicorns by following this business model, right? So by just talking about 3 examples, what did you do? You created a generalization which is applicable to all, right? Remember our initial, one of the examples that we have, moving from a smaller to a bigger set, right? So छोटे example से बड़े example पे आप चले गए, ठीक है? Next, crime rates fell as library funding increased, right? So when we say crime rates fell as library funding increased, it's not necessary that these two are connected with each other. These two things, this is a very important thing that you learn today, right? That when 2 things happen together, right, we say that they are correlated to each other. They might have a correlation with one another, right? In this particular case, we converted that into a cause. Increasing library funding directly reduces crime. So you change that correlation into causation. So that's something that you've got to be very careful about. changing a correlation into causation. So that's something which was done in this particular example, where two things happening together, you said one led to the other. So you can literally see that these different language traps, right, are doing nothing else. But would you agree that this is kind of manipulation with the language? Last one is super minute to notice. Last one is the toughest amongst the set actually. Correlation and causation. Actually अगर एक तरीके से देखा जाए तो आपको अगर correlation और causation समझ आ जाता है ना, तो आप in a lot of leading publications, in a lot of newspapers, you will be able to call out authors that, oh, this is what these guys are doing. That they are adopting these sharp practices where two things were correlated to each other and they gave it as a cause. Think about it, what politicians do. Politicians actually continuously change these correlations into causes. That things are happening together, hence one led to the other. So people keep making these false claims all the time. So that's something that happens, right? Last set of, so this word, and that's why I use the word manipulation, because the last trap that we'll see, it uses the word manipulation in the trap itself, and hence I wanted to end on that sentiment of manipulation here. So the last thing that these guys do with respect, one of the things that they do with respect to answer choices is that they introduce manipulation by using slightly different words, right? Words which have slightly different meaning, or they use synonyms which are not exact matches with each other, and because they do so, they alter the meaning. Two very good examples of this, right? Of using words or altering or changing, very subtle change by just changing the vocabulary, right? For example, instead of saying the company plans to modify its approach, right, you replaced it with overhaul, right? Do you understand the difference between these two words, modify and overhaul? What is the difference between these two words, modify and overhaul? How are these two words differentiated with each other? Modify and overhaul. Who's going to give the meaning or the difference between these two words? Modify means to change, right? So when you try to modify something, you're absolutely right, Himank, it means to change. Overhaul does not mean to make worse, right? When you overhaul something, that means you bring about, you completely change it. Overall is, Demolition Boys is very close to the answer. Overall is complete change, right? Like you completely change your approaches on a much wider scale, right? So modify is a lot smaller, right? Can I say this? Modify really does not tell me how big or small the change is. Modify just tells me one thing, that there is going to be change. Overhaul, on the other hand, implies there is going to be a big change. So hence these two statements, very, very subtle difference. Right, so we can see the difference. Next, the changes were implemented systematically. The changes were implemented strategically. So there was one word which was replaced. Difference between systematic and strategic. Difference between systematic and strategic. So when can we see the difference between these two? To do something according to a system, that means to follow a process, right? To do it systematically, there is a process which has been put in place, so you are following that process, right? So you are going step by step. Strategically, something which is thought out. You are adopting some strategy, right? Where you are either, So either strategy can be the involvement of a lot of new ideas. You are targeting something in particular, right? There is a lot of planning behind something. There is a certain agenda, certain thinking behind something. That's your strategy, right? So for example, when a team turns up into when a cricket team, so we've got India versus England going on today, right? So the Indian team, when it started the match, it had a certain strategy, right? So they have a strategy in place that they want to implement, right? The way they do it, the way they implement that strategy is going to be through a system, right? They will follow a set of processes that they have. So that's the subtle distinction between these two examples, right? So a quick recap, we can see that how do authors, how do they introduce subtle little problems or changes? They have these word choice manipulations, logical fallacies, out of context distortions where they change the context itself. They use extreme language traps, they use scope traps, so they use and partial truth traps. They use all these different kinds of distractions wherein they try to introduce some error or the other, right? So if as learners, right, if as problem solvers, we can be aware of these different things, can we see that we can improve our attempt here a little? That just by being aware of this is what is being done, our way of solving, right, it improves fractionally. There is, because now we are aware of the games which are being played with us. So this is like a sneak peek into the examiner's mind. These are the things that he's doing with those answer choices. So now you guys, at least we know that this is what is going to happen, right? Does this 40-45 minute discussion around these different traps which are being set out for you, will this enable you to spot all of these traps instantly? Absolutely not. I can't lie, right? So this is not going to, there is no instant change, right? This is not Maggie. So in fact, Maggie का खुद का ही ad 2 मिनट का था, but मेरी तो Maggie कभी 2 मिनट में नहीं बनी, right? So, but it at least makes us think here कि these are the different ways, these are the different tricks that we've got to be aware of, and if we perfect these more and more and more, we will get better, right? So that's something that is going to happen. So this completes part 1 of the session, right? So in today's session, this was part 1, right? Now part 2 of this session is going to be all practice, right? So part 1 was all theory. Part 2 is putting these things into practice, being aware of these subtle little distinctions, trying to put this into practice. So what we'll do is we'll start solving RCs now, right? We will it is not, Pavan, you don't need to know every word in a passage, right? You need to understand the context. Vocabulary has never stopped anyone from being good at RCs in itself, right? So all you've got to do is you've also got to know you've got to understand the deeper meanings, right? You've got to understand the logic behind it. So if you understand meanings from context, that is sufficient. That is a skill that you need to have. The more you read, the better you get at it. So words won't really stop you. Next thing now, before we start solving the passages for today's session, right? Next part is putting all of this into practice now and applying these things. That's something that we do. We had this question at the start of the session. What is it that one should think while solving RCs, right? So what is it that you should think? Thing number 1, you will obviously, one thing that we discussed, you will think about the subject. You will try to identify the subject of the passage, right? Thing number 2 that you will do is you will think about why has the author written it and the para-wise main ideas, right? with every paragraph you read, right? As a rule of thumb, to get started with analyzing RCs or analyzing articles, what you should do is, let's assume there are 4 paragraphs. So P1, P2, P3, P4 represent 4 paragraphs in a passage or an article. With every paragraph, you should identify what its main subject, the main thing the paragraph is talking about, and 1 to 2 pointers, right? You with each subsequent paragraph, right? So by the end of the passage, when you've finished reading, you should know what are the different paragraphs about. There is one fundamental truth that all of us would have to accept, which you guys should accept and you should be clear about. There is, unless and until you are Sheldon Cooper, right? And we are not. So, and even Sheldon Cooper is fictional in nature. So unless and until you are Sheldon Cooper, there is no human way you can remember every word that you've read, right? That is not going to happen in the exam. Agreed? Fair enough? That is not going to happen. What is the next best thing that we can do? We can have this para-wise structure in our minds. Main idea, main pointers, every paragraph. This is what para 1 says, para 2 says, para 3 says. This is how I read, right? I never try to memorize all the details. I don't try to absorb more than what I can retain. The target is very simple. Para-wise, 1 to 2 pointers. What is the main things it's talking about? Then if there is any specific information that I have to come back to, I can come back to that while solving the RC passage, right? Fair enough, that works. That solves our purpose. That is all we need to do, right? We really don't need to do anything more than that. So that is all that is required of us. So that is what you guys are going to do, right? You are going to focus on these details. Along with this, while, especially when you are reading articles, right? Always keep asking yourself this question: why has the author written this? What is his purpose behind this particular article? Why has he said what he has said? So just keep thinking about these things. Now, there is one more thing which is going to happen. When you ask yourself to summarize the passage para-wise, right? Or you keep asking yourself that you'll focus on each paragraph and what are the main things which are said in it, you will realize that your focus improves. 1 or 2 pointers, Shravani, the main points of that paragraph. So we will put this into practice. I will show this with the RC examples that we do, the analysis that we do, that 1 or 2 key points from every paragraph, you basically mentally note them down. To begin with, you can do this exercise with a pen and paper. Ultimately, you need to do it mentally, because if you do it with a pen and paper, it will slow you down drastically. Amisha, the first thing is, at this stage of preparation, right, reading is going to greatly help you. Next, these tough sentences that you are facing, try to understand the reason. Is the knowledge behind them or the sentence structure troubling you, right? Because for a few of these sentences, you should go, probably you can even ask AI to go and help you explain those particular sentences, the meaning behind it, because that is how you will learn the language, right? Because if you are not able to understand sentences and sentence structures, then we've got to first establish why. Is it the vocabulary or is it the sentence structure, or is it both, right? And then when we seek explanations in simpler language for the same, right? And with reading, with these explanations, we improve. To say that I could have skipped this question by giving you an easier answer for this, but I won't do that, right? So this is, it is what it is, and we've got to put in that effort in order to overcome this challenge. But this is how you overcome it. So this is what we guys will do. So ready for solving RC passages now, guys? Let's get started with the first passage. Shravani, let's do this with a souvenir is something which you have, which you take away as a gift, right? As a token of something. Generally, souvenirs are awarded at, say, presentations or at these gatherings that people have. It's for remembrance sake, right? Great, guys. So let's get started with the first passage. The first one is because I've structured it this way that the passages, they keep getting longer and longer. So obviously the first one, I wanted it to be the shortest one. So this is a single paragraph passage only, just one paragraph, and we'll probably, the second one will be longer, the third one will be even longer. So that's how we will go about it, right? So let's get started. Passage number 1. Once you've read the passage, the format that we'll adopt is, we'll give everyone time. Once you've read the passage, I'll step aside. Once you've read the passage, please mention done in the comments, right? Subject is that one main thing. So for example, this is about free speech. For example, any particular passage. And pointer is, what does it say about free speech? Or this particular passage is about African philosophers. That is the subject. And what is it saying about them becomes the pointer or the main point. So once you are done reading, you mention done in the comments section, right? I'll head over to the questions. I think there are 4 questions for this particular passage. So we'll solve all 4 quickly. Then we'll get back to the analysis and we'll analyze one question at a time, right? Done? So that's the format we follow. Let's get started, guys. I'll just step aside. Great. Everyone has read? I'm heading over to the questions now, right? So quickly keep marking your questions. How should we go about the answers? Answers for the individual questions. So all questions are sequenced, so just give the question number and the answer, right? And then once you guys are done with the 4 questions, then you guys then we'll get back to the discussion and we'll see the answers for each, right? Chalo. So this is that word manipulation question, right? That we had at the end. Difference between overhaul and difference between strategic and systematic. You got one different answer and everyone else is couple of different answers now. Good. So solved. Everyone has done this question. Going over to the next question now. Quickly solve this. Good to see you attempting these questions, Leena. So part of the process of improving in the language is we've got to keep at it. Great. Everyone is solved? And you can keep noting down your answers as well side by side so that in the analysis you can then recheck, right? Next question, quickly. Solved question number 3. Quick answers. Great. This is a easy one just because I wanted you guys to go through this idiom, so I kept this here. Great. I believe everyone has solved all the 4 questions, right? Let's go back to the passage now. Let's start with the passage analysis. Let's keep the important pointers in mind, right? And then we'll quickly go through the 4 questions one by one, their answers and their analysis. So let's do that, right? Now, while we do that, there is one very useful thing that I'm going to give you with this particular passage. I'm actually going to give you a way of, this is a bonus for you guys. I'll give you guys a way of reading such passages as well. One way, one trick that you can employ in such passages, in such content, which makes your life a little easier while reading. So that's something that I'll share with you guys as well. So let's get started with the analysis first, and let's analyze this first, and then we delve deeper into it. The ambitious African philosopher finds herself between the devil and the deep blue sea. She has to convince, I'm leaving this on purpose right now. We'll get to the meaning of the idiom when we arrive at that question. So the ambitious African philosopher finds herself between the devil and the deep blue sea. So I can understand this much, that this is a tough situation that this person is in. So that much we can establish. She has to convince the West that she has something interesting to say about philosophy. So the West, right? So remember, we are talking about African philosopher. So the Western countries are those in Europe or in United States. She has to insist that African philosophy is not the same as philosophy in Africa, right? Now, one very simple parallel analogy for you guys to understand this, right? And this is where I'll give you a small little reading trick which will help improve your comprehension. So if I replace this African philosophy with, just for a second, right, if we replace this with Indian cars, right, and philosophy in Africa, we replace it with cars in India, right? Can you see a little bit of magic happening here? Can you see your understanding going up? Right? Can you differentiate between Indian cars and cars in India? What is it that we would be implying? What would we mean by Indian cars? And what would we mean by cars in India? Indian cars and cars in India. Can you give examples of both? This is a trick of wherein you correlate these difficult philosophical concepts with our everyday real world examples. It helps us understand that philosophical term a lot better, right? Both are not the same. Indian cars and cars in India, right? So when I say Mercedes or Mercedes, BMW, Ferrari, Audi, etc., would you regard these as Indian cars, or would you regard these as cars in India, cars available in India? Whereas when we talk about Tata Motors or Mahindra, the cars they are making, those are Indian cars, right? So Indian cars imply originally made in India, right? So our Made in India campaign, Make in India campaign, right? Cars in India would refer to all the different cars available in India, right? So Indian cars, what is it that they imply? They imply the sentiment, right, of something which is being done within the country itself. It belongs to that country, right? Now, if we extend this to philosophy, what would African philosophy become? African philosophy would become original African thought which has been born in Africa itself, born in African conditions, born in African socio-political contexts, right? So it is born in Africa. It is African in its nature, right? Whereas philosophy in Africa can, on the other hand, have all these concepts which are imported from the West, right? Now, the moment these concepts are imported from the West, do they lose out originality? Do they lose out originality when they're imported from the West? They do, right? Because now these ideas are being imported. As are cars being imported in India, these ideas are being imported, right? So you can see this amazing hack of converting concepts which are philosophical in nature, of correlating them with our everyday lives. Examples, wherever it is possible. This is not 100% applicable everywhere, but wherever it is, it just improves. All of a sudden now, right? All of a sudden now, I can see in this particular passage, right? This I picked up from Aeon, right? There are two different. Now in this particular case, I can see what is the author trying to do. She's trying to pit here basically two types of philosophers. One are African philosophers. These are people who are working with original African thought. And then there is philosophy in Africa. What are these guys doing? They are also importing concepts from outside of Africa, right? So अब अगर इसको Indian context में भी आप देखो philosophy के, right? Do you think imported Western concepts in philosophy, they work in the Indian context? Do they work for our Indian society? They don't necessarily, right? We have a different value system. We have a different culture. Same problem with Africa, right? Each place is its unique place. So it might not necessarily work. So now we are talking about this particular person, the ambitious African philosopher, basically who's doing original work in African philosophy. She has to insist African philosophy is not the same as philosophy in Africa. Basically, she has to prove that these two are different. And by insisting on African philosophy, she stamps her foot hard on the ground and defends the virtue of originality. So now what is it that she's saying? She's stamping her foot hard on the ground. This is not physically stamping your foot. Basically, you are saying very forcefully that African philosophy is original. It is innovative thinking, right? Innovative thinking that's not subservient. Subservient is when you are under someone, when you are a slave to someone else. You are serving. Subservient, the way you remember this word is, you are a servant of someone else. Subservient, that is what you break it down into. So subservient to the dominant Western tradition of philosophical thinking, and which at the same time transcends traditional African thought, right? So she says it's original in nature. We are not dependent on the Western tradition of philosophical thinking. We are not servants of the West, right? And it transcends traditional African thought. Now this introduces a new term in the passage, traditional African thought. What do we mean by transcend? Transcend is to go beyond something, right? Transcend means to go beyond. The other front of her struggle is Africa, right? One, she's trying to convince the world, right? On the one front, she has to convince the Western world. She has to tell the Western world, we are original, we are not your servants, we have our own original thinking, our own original thoughts. Second, she has to convince people within Africa itself, right? She has to confront a very limited local audience. Averse, that means they dislike to radical creative thinking. So the local audience, they don't want to think creatively, they are averse to it, right? Most of our colleagues don't think originality is possible, even desirable. These are colleagues who studied Western philosophy all through college and had come to see Western philosophy as supreme and only universal template of philosophy. So this particular person, this poor African philosopher, she has to convince the West that African philosophy is great, it has original thought. Then she has to convince people within Africa itself, these traditional people, what is it that they believe in? They studied philosophy of the West, right? And that is what they believe in, right? They studied it in college, and those are the same theories that they are giving. And they see Western philosophy as supreme. They don't want to do original work in African philosophy. So within her system, she's dealing with people who are not really open to thinking creatively, thinking originally, right? And she has people outside, right, who are in the West also not willing or open to acknowledge the fact that philosophy, African philosophy, has original thought as well, right? So it's effectively, if I look at it, it's a person who's living in the academic world of philosophy. This person wants to do original work, right? She wants to say that this is what African philosophy is about, right? But she's got opponents on the outside, the Western world, which look down upon African philosophy. She's got opponents within the system as well, people who just look up to Western philosophy and who don't want to do original work. So that is what she is dealing with, right? Now I have one more question with you guys, right? In this particular case, when we say, right, I think all your comments, they came now all of a sudden, they had gone missing. The comments had stopped scrolling for a few seconds, right? So now one more thing that I want to ask you guys, is this ambitious African philosopher, when he refers to her as she, is this referring to one single person, or is he referring to a female? One single person or female? One single person, female or no? This will further increase your understanding, guys. Referring to one single person or female or no? Yes or no? It's not referring to any one single person. This is just a style of writing, right? So one more new thing that you learned today is, when we refer to, so can I say this? The ambitious African philosopher is actually referring to whole set of people who are working in this. They might be males or females, right? But this style of writing where a class of people, right, for them we replace it with a pronoun, right? We give it the qualities of a person. This style of writing in figures of speech and writing is called personification. So in this case, a class or a category of people, a set of people have been personified. They've been converted into a single person. This is actually not a single person. This is still a class of people. Chalo, understood? The passage is clear now. I hope you would use this useful trick that we used while understanding the passage. Yes, this is a style of writing, Atharv. This is what we call personification in writing. You are actually referring to a category of people. You are referring to all ambitious African philosophers. But on purpose, you used she. You used this she for impact, so that there is an impact on the reader. He can connect with it. This is called personification. It's a literary device. It's a tool which is used by authors in writing. Chalo, question number 1. It can be inferred from the passage, right? A lot of you gave C or D as answers, right? Even A, right? Let's quickly go through all the options in question number 1. It can be inferred from the passage, right? Number 1, philosophy in Africa. What is philosophy in Africa? Remember its parallels, cars in India, right? As mentioned in the passage, mimics Western philosophy, right? So the first word that we've got here is mimic, right? So that's word number 1, right? Philosophy in Africa, as mentioned in the passage, explores Western philosophy, depends upon Western philosophy, counters Western philosophy, right? Now, the first question that I ask you, right? Not necessarily they are getting neglected. It's just a figure of speech, right? Makes it easier to correlate with the passage. Now, first thing that I ask you is philosophy in Africa and African philosophy. Let's write African philosophy as AP and philosophy in Africa as PIA, right? Now, which is the good one? अच्छे वाला कौन सा है? एक अच्छे वाला है, एक बुरे वाला है ऑथर के हिसाब से। अच्छे वाला कौन सा है? अफ्रीकन फिलॉसफी के फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका। अच्छे वाला कौन सा है? जल्दी जल्दी बताओ। अच्छे वाला अफ्रीकन फिलॉसफी है, ठीक है निशिता, अच्छे वाला अफ्रीकन फिलॉसफी है, वो ओरिजिनल थॉट है। फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका तो ये बाहर से इंपोर्ट हो रहा है ना, ठीक है। अब इनमें से कौन सा ऑप्शन हम पहले ही रूल आउट कर दे? ऑप्शन नंबर डी, डज फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका काउंटर वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी? फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका तो वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी को तो यूज करती है, वो तो उसके ही भक्त है, राइट, उसको काउंटर तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं करते, राइट। फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका तो वो डायरेक्टली वेस्ट की ही चीजें लेके अपना आगे यूज कर रहे हैं, तो ये तो रूल आउट हो गया, काउंटर नहीं हो सकता, राइट। नाउ मिमिक्स, एक्सप्लोर्स, डिपेंड्स अपॉन, इनमें से कौन सा? तीन क्लोज ऑप्शन है, मिमिक करना, एक्सप्लोर करना, डिपेंड्स अपॉन, राइट। अब इस केस में मिमिक करना, राइट, जो पहला ए ऑप्शन है, जहां पे तुम्हें बहुत सटल डिस्टिंक्शन पता होना चाहिए। मिमिक करना होता है किसी भी चीज का मजाक उड़ाना, राइट, किसी को कॉपी करना, राइट, कॉपी करना बट मजाक उड़ाने के लिए। सो व्हेन यू कॉपी समवन विद द सेंटिमेंट ऑफ मेकिंग फन ऑफ इट, इज फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका मेकिंग फन ऑफ मिमिकिंग वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी? It's not mimicking Western philosophy, it does not make fun of it, it actually follows it, right? So वो उसको follow करती है, ठीक है। Philosophy in Africa actually follows Western philosophy, it follows it. Now which is the word which is closest to follow, the sentiment of following here in this particular case? Explores की depends upon, कौन सा वर्ड सेंटिमेंट ऑफ फॉलोइंग को अप्लाई करता है? सो मिमिक रूल आउट हो गया, राइट। एक्सप्लोर, व्हेन वी से एक्सप्लोर करना, वी डोंट नो वेदर इट इज फॉलोइंग इट और नॉट, राइट, डिपेंड्स अपॉन समथिंग, दैट मीन्स उसका उसके ऊपर रिलेशनशिप है, राइट, दैट डिपेंड्स अपॉन इट। So depends upon is the closest to follows, hence the correct answer option number C in this particular case. Our correct answer is option number C, depends upon. All you've got to know, or all you've got to had to understand while reading the passage was philosophy in Africa वो वाली philosophy है जो कॉपी करती है वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी को, वो उसको फॉलो करती है। तो कौन सा ऑप्शन है जो वो फॉलोइंग के सेंटिमेंट को इंप्लाई करता है? ऑप्शन नंबर सी वो वाला ऑप्शन है, हेंस आर करेक्ट आंसर ऑप्शन नंबर सी इन दिस केस। नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन पे चले। One of the jobs of the African philosopher mentioned in the passage is to, right? Remember, the African philosopher, she had two jobs. Agreed? The African philosopher, she had two jobs mentioned in the passage, right? Which was job number one? Job number one was to convince the West that African philosophy is innovative and valuable, that you should pay attention to it, right? Job number two was convincing within people in Africa itself, philosophers in Africa itself, that they should look up to African philosophy and not look up to Western philosophy. Those were the two roles that the African philosopher had. Those were the two jobs that the African philosopher had. How many jobs is the question asking us for? It's asking us for one of the jobs, right? So one of the jobs that the author is, that the African philosopher has to do. One of the jobs of the African philosophers mentioned in the passage is distinguish between two streams of thoughts in philosophy, right? Prove that a certain philosophy exists on its own without any dependence on another dominant philosophy. Highlight how philosophy in Africa is derived from original African thought. So can we rule out option number C directly? Because philosophy in Africa is picked up from Western philosophy. So option number C is our incorrect fact, is an option choice which is misleading us by pointing out an incorrect fact. So we eliminate option number C first. So let's do one thing. Let's start eliminating answer choices. The ones which are completely incorrect, option number C is opposite of what is given in the passage, gets ruled out. Easy to identify, right? Opposites are very easy to identify. D, showcase the need for thinking originally and getting rid of the past which depends upon the West. Now, showcase the need for thinking originally is valid, partially correct, right? This is our partial mismatch option. But does the passage at any given point of time mention getting rid of the past? Is there any mention of getting rid of the past? Then हमें past को भूल जाना चाहिए, कहीं पे भी mentioned है? कहीं पे भी mentioned नहीं है getting rid of the past? So that introduces an alteration, right? So now I am left with two options, right? इसमें ये गलती थी, मुझे एक गलती मिल गई, इसमें मुझे गलती मिल गई. अब distinguish between two streams of thoughts in philosophy. Did at any given point of time the African philosopher distinguish the different streams of philosophy at any given point of time? She never tried to distinguish between different streams of philosophy. The African philosopher wanted to prove that African philosophy is original. It does not depend upon Western thought, right? It's not distinguishing African philosophy from Western thought, right? It's not giving you how is African philosophy different from Western philosophy. She's not giving you those pointers. On the other hand, she's actually saying to you is that African philosophy is important, it's innovative, we should pay attention to it, right? Hence, option number B, that proves that a certain philosophy exists on its own without any dependence on another dominant philosophy. Hence, option number B. This is a good question. Both these questions were actually good questions. Third question, the author of the passage highlights that traditional proponents of philosophy in Africa. The first thing that you do, remember when I had asked you at the start of the class that always be careful of the question statements. Who are traditional proponents of philosophy in Africa? ये कौन है? ट्रेडिशनल लोग कौन है? कौन से वाले हैं? ट्रेडिशनल लोग वो हैं जो फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका को प्रमोट करते हैं. फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका को प्रमोट करने वाले लोग कौन से हैं? वो किस में बिलीव करते हैं? वो वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी में बिलीव रखते हैं. दे डोंट बिलीव इन ओरिजिनल अफ्रीकन थॉट, राइट? अफ्रीकन रिश्ता अफ्रीकन फिलॉसफी में नहीं बिलीव रखते. ट्रेडिशनल लोग, ट्रेडिशनली तो लोग क्या करी जा रहे हैं? वो तो वही फॉलो करी जा रहे हैं ना जो आज तक चलता रहा है. वो तो वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी को कॉपी करते हैं, इनोवेटिव थिंकिंग में बिलीव नहीं करते. वही है ट्रेडिशनल लोग, वही है जो वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी पढ़ के आए. एग्जैक्टली हिमांक, बहुत केयरफुली देखना है. छोटी सी चीज है यार, केयरफुली यही तो चीज देखनी है. तो रिमेंबर एट द स्टार्ट आई सेड कि पहला चीज क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करने का, क्वेश्चन ही ध्यान से पढ़ो. तो ट्रेडिशनल प्रोपोनेंट्स ऑफ फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका, वो लोग जो फिलॉसफी इन अफ्रीका को प्रमोट करते हैं, ओरिजिनल अफ्रीकन थॉट को प्रमोट नहीं करते हैं, ओरिजिनल को नहीं करते हैं. तो ऑप्शन नंबर 1 करेक्ट बन जाता है. वो वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी को एडहियर करते हैं, हाँ वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी पढ़ के आए उसी को पढ़ाते हैं, राइट? believes in Western philosophical thought without giving sufficient attention to original thought. Again, repetition of combination of A and B, C. So क्या आंसर बन गया? ऑप्शन नंबर डी, ऑल ऑफ द अबव. इस क्वेश्चन को सॉल्व करने के लिए तुम्हें चाहिए क्या था? फॉर सॉल्विंग दिस क्वेश्चन यू नीडेड वन वेरी सिंपल थिंग यार. तुम्हें यही तो समझना था कि ये है कौन. एक बार ये समझ आ गया तो क्वेश्चन सॉल्व हो गया. एज सिंपल एज दैट. चलो ये वाला तो लास्ट वाला तो इजी क्वेश्चन है, ये सिर्फ वोकैबुलरी पर्पस के लिए है, ठीक है? ये इसलिए है कि तुम और कुछ नहीं, एक नया इडियम सीख लो. आरसी पर्सपेक्टिव से नहीं है ये क्वेश्चन. The author of the passage highlights traditional proponents of philosophy in Africa. Sorry, what does the author mean by the devil and the deep blue sea? What does the author mean by the devil and the deep blue sea? So इसमें से पहला ऑप्शन कौन सा एलिमिनेट करें फटाफट? पहली चीज, is the African philosopher stuck in a problem? Right, she is stuck in a problem, right? So it cannot be pleasant choices, right? So this one makes this mistake. Option number C, can I rule it out? Cannot be pleasant choices, ruled out, right? And Himank is absolutely correct. This is an extreme answer choice, impossible situation. That she is in a difficult situation, but to say impossible situation where there are two equally disastrous choices, this would become a very, very extreme answer choice. Agreed? Extremely negative answer choice. So, ruled out. In a difficult situation, in a tricky situation where there are two opposing choices, in a difficult situation where there are two equally unpleasant choices, right? Now, in this particular case, when we say she is stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, we are trying to showcase that she's in a very difficult situation, right? There are two places, she's in the middle of it, right? On the one hand is the Western world, which does not believe in the originality of African thought. On the other hand are these traditional proponents of philosophy in Africa, which believe in the Western world, these Africans themselves, who are not promoting African philosophy, right? Now, are these two people, Western world and these traditional proponents, are they opposing each other? Are these opposing choices? These are not opposing choices, right? What you want to say is, it's actually, these are two very unpleasant. She can't go in either direction. On one side there is negativity, on the other side there is negativity. On the one side there is unpleasantness, on the other side there is unpleasantness. On both sides there is equal amount of unpleasantness. The situation is very, very difficult in nature because you are on both sides, you are surrounded by problems. Hence the correct answer in this case, option number A. It's not opposing choices, it's unpleasant choices, or unpleasant gets replaced by the word unfavorable, right? Both her options are actually not favorable. Both are difficult situations. Got it, everyone? So how many did you get right from these 4 questions? कितने ठीक हुए पहले 4 में से? That's a low strike rate, Himank. It's okay. Good, Jyotirmay. 3 is a good number. 3 out of 4 is good, guys. 4 Demolition Boys, great, terrific. Great, guys. 2 for Neha, 1 for Amisha, 3, 4, only 1 right, Atharv. Not an issue, dost. But I hope you learned something really, really valuable from this passage. And Shavni, D is too extreme. A, is it an impossible situation? She is facing a difficult situation. An impossible situation would be one which cannot be solved. So we can't say that, right? D would be too extreme. And to say these are disastrous choices, again, two very, very extreme sentiments. Too negative. Great, guys. Ready for the next passage? Great. So this one has 2 slides, right? So quickly go through this, read this, right? नेहा, हर पैराग्राफ का ट्रिक एक ही है समरी लिखने का. हर पैसेज को पैराग्राफ वाइज ब्रेक डाउन करो, उसकी एक से दो मेन बातें बस क्या है, सबसे जरूरी बातें क्या है, राइट? वी सॉल्व इट इन द सेम वे. जस्ट क्विकली गो थ्रू दिस and read through this, and once you are done you let me know. I go to the next slide, right? I'll just be back in 1 minute, guys. I'll just take a quick washroom break. I'll be back in 1 minute, exactly 60 seconds. Done, everyone? Should I head over to the questions? चलो फटाफट एक एक करके ये वाला ध्यान से सोचना। चलो जल्दी जल्दी आंसर दो गाइस, फिर अगले क्वेश्चन पे जाएं, फिर हमने एनालाइज भी करने हैं सारे। नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, मतलब एक चीज तो दिख रही है कि सबके आंसर अलग है कमेंट्स में, है ना। मतलब अगर ऐसा हो रहा है तो मतलब क्वेश्चन बढ़िया है, सबका आंसर सेम हो तो दिक्कत है। नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, relatively easier, seventh one. 8th question. ऋषिता का आंसर आ गया, बाकी लोग, श्रेयन का भी आ गया। थोड़े थोड़े इजी क्वेश्चन भी होने चाहिए, है ना, बीच में, जिनके सिंगल आंसर हो। आई थिंक एक क्वेश्चन तो हमें मिल गया जो डिस्कस नहीं होगा ज़्यादा। इसमें 6 क्वेश्चन हैं टोटल, है ना, तो 2 क्वेश्चन और है। सी 9th का। नाइन्थ एक अच्छा चैलेंजिंग सवाल है। चलो, इसका लास्ट क्वेश्चन इस पर्टिकुलर पैसेज का। ध्यान से एक एक वर्ड के ऊपर फोकस करो भाई, छोटे छोटे वर्ड्स के ऊपर फोकस करना पड़ेगा, ऐसे तो गेम निकल जाएगी हाथ से। Chalo, we are done with the answers for this particular passage. Let's start with the analysis, right? I think one fair assessment would be that out of the 6 questions, there were a couple of easy questions. Some of you would have gotten a feel of it as well. That 2 क्वेश्चन थे, एक या 2 क्वेश्चन तो काफ़ी आसान थे, जहाँ पे कोई हमारे आंसर्स भी हम देखेंगे तो ज़्यादा कोई डिबेट नहीं है, सबके आंसर्स सिमिलर ही हैं, राइट? तो बाकी वाले सारे जगहों पे थोड़े छोटे छोटे इश्यूज है, ठीक है? सो लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड एंड पहले एनालाइज करते हैं पैसेज अपना फटाफट, ठीक है? इंटरेस्टिंग पैसेज, एक इंटरेस्टिंग कंटेंट है ना, पीस ऑफ कंटेंट, ध्यान से समझाऊंगा, राइट? सो पहला ये जो पैसेज है, इसमें किस किस लोगों ने हेलेन केलर और रेने डेकार्टे का नाम सुना हुआ है? हेलेन केलर और रेने डेकार्टे का गर्ल नाम सुना हुआ है? सुना होना चाहिए था। ये डेकार्टे, जिन जिन लोगों ने मैथ्स थोड़ा पढ़ा है या कैलकुलस कभी पढ़ा है, तो ये सेम डेकार्टे है, वही डेकार्टे है मैथ्स वाला, राइट? सो रेनेसॉ के टाइम पे मैथमेटिशियंस एंड फिलोसोफर्स, देयर वाज अ ह्यूज ओवरलैप अमंगस्ट दीज पीपल, right? So there used to be mathematicians as well and philosophers as well, even in the modern day world. So it's the same Descartes. And Helen Keller is very famous, a deaf and blind girl who was a writer and an activist. She worked for the rights of the disabled in America and did a lot of pioneering work, right? Unfortunately, she was deaf and blind, and she overcame these challenges, right? Rose above this to write books, to be an activist for the rights of the specially abled, right? So she worked for that a lot, right? Very famous individual. So let's read the 3 paragraphs. While reading the 3 paragraphs, we will keep summarizing them side by side. We will keep writing down the important pointers. We'll keep noting down the important stuff, right? So that mentally we don't need to come back to the passage, right? Let's get started. I think, therefore I am, the 17th century philosopher, proclaimed as the first truth. So when you proclaimed something as the first truth, that means this is the most important piece of information for René Descartes. That is first truth in his own personal context, right? So he regards it as the most important truth of his life, that I think. So my existence is basically because of my ability to think. That is what gives me this existence, right? Essentially gives you this identity. The truth was rediscovered in 1887 by Helen Keller, a deaf and blind girl, then 7 years of age. Now again, this is when we say the truth was rediscovered, right? So this is again a style of writing in the language, which is just emphasizing the importance of this fact, right? Remember, these are effectively, when I say I think, therefore I am, can I say this, that this is a personal realization? That this is something that the individual is realizing, right? And after realizing it, he's sharing it with the world, that this is something very important, that it is your thinking that defines you, right? So they want to highlight that. Hence this style of writing. Then 7 years of age, I did not know that I am. I lived in a world that was no world. When I learned the meaning of I and me and found that I was something, she later explained, I began to think. Then consciousness first existed for me. So when these people, they started to see themselves as individuals, they started to see the I, they started to see the me, they started to see their ability to think. They formed identities of their own in their minds, right? That's when they became conscious of the world, because they saw themselves as part of this world, right? In order to see this world, right, as it is, the first thing is you've got to identify yourself as well, that you exist, right? So, as both these pioneers knew, right, the reference here, pioneers, is it's referring to these individuals being pioneers, these individuals being famous in their own fields. They were leading in their own fields, right? Leading thinkers. A fundamental part of conscious experience is inner speech, the experience of verbal thought expressed in one's inner voice. Your inner voice is you. So now this is where I will ask you guys this super important question, which you can hate me for it as well, that when we look at inner speech or inner voice, right, and when we say our inner speech, our inner voice, that is what who we are, right? If you think very carefully about it, and if I ask you this question, I'll just read your names. For example, Manish, Diya, Atharv, Smriti, Viren, Rishita, Ankit, Amisha, all the others in the class, right? Demolition boys. Uh, if I ask you, who are you, right? Or if I ask myself this question, who am I, right? Who am I, right? Is this the physical body that is present here? That is who the person is. Because to you guys, as of now, visible through this camera, your perception, right, of me is basically this physical body that I am. But along with this physical body, whatever it is that I'm saying, right, whatever it is that I'm communicating to you, my person or my being is not just this body, right? So for example, for my own self as well, we don't look at ourselves as our own bodies, right? So there is, at some point of time, there is something within us which is ticking, right? We realize there is this person within us. So it's almost like when you lie down at the end of the day and you put your head on the pillow, all of us have we have this dialogue with ourselves where we review our daily lives, right? That this is what we did, this is what happened. It's almost all of us do it in the world, right? So there is this voice within us which is identifying as our personality, as our being. So there is an inner voice, there is this inner speech which goes beyond the body. The body exists, there is no denying that, right? But now all of a sudden we can see Eastern philosophy coming into this picture where the body is the vehicle for carrying this I, right? This identity has to exist within, right? There has to be this ability to think, this ability to reason, this inner voice, this inner speech, this continuous inner dialogue that we are having amongst ourselves. So that is what is being referred to. So your inner voice, your inner speech is you. That is who you are, right? Now, next question. When did any one of us realize that we had this inner voice or inner speech? Very difficult to say. Now, when I was a toddler, I really can't recall that time. But probably around 5, 6, 7, when you start to say that age 4, 5, 6, 7, right? When you start to exhibit that I am, this is who I am. Once you learn the language, once you learn that speech to articulate things, that this is who I am, this is what I want. When you discover that voice, right? And that voice is not language. That's basic, this ability to articulate thoughts, right? That's when you arrive at that identity. That's when you have that identity. Different people will have it at different times, right? And very difficult. I cannot, in my own personal space, I can't analyze it. I don't know when was it that I developed that sentiment or that feeling of that I exist as an independent human being. Just can't recall it, right? And effectively, it's a way of our being, right? It's a way of our life. This is who we are. This is how we live. It's very difficult. None of us think about it, but they've put this thought on paper and they've highlighted it now, forcing us to think about it. This is food for thought after the class as well. That voice isn't the sound of anything. It's not even physical. We can't observe it or measure it in any direct way. This inner voice or inner speech there is no physical thing as our inner voice, inner speech. It's not physical. If it's not physical, then we can arguably only attempt to study it by contemplation or introspection. So the only way I can get in touch with my inner speech or inner voice is by thinking about it, right? I have to think and I have to look within me. I can't discover my inner voice by talking about it with you. Students of the inner voice are thinking about thinking an act that feels vague, which is really difficult. Imagine it's someone's job to think about what is inner voice or inner speech. There are people who are studying it. Very difficult. William James, a 19th century philosopher who's often touted as the originator of American psychology, compared the act to trying to turn up the gas quickly enough to see how darkness looks. What is the reference to gas here when you are trying to turn up the gas? What is the reference to trying to turn up the gas in this particular case? It's basically you go inside a dark room, you want to see how darkness looks. You can't look, there is no light, right? It's complete darkness. You want to see the physical aspect of darkness. So you turn up the gas, you basically turn up the gas light, right? To see it. But the moment you do it, what happens? The moment you turn up the light to see darkness, the darkness disappears, right? So which just highlights what? That this is a really, really difficult thing to do. Very, very difficult thing to do. Because once you start to think, what is my inner voice? What are the thoughts that I'm thinking about? You will get all sorts of thoughts. You will get all sorts of thoughts, all sorts of ideas. It will get really, really difficult to decide what is it that you are thinking about. Yet, now the last paragraph, would all of you agree that the last paragraph was the best paragraph in this passage? Best paragraph to read? The last paragraph says, yet through new methods of experimentation in the last few decades, the nature of inner speech is finally being revealed. In one set of studies, scans are allowing researchers to study the brain regions linked with inner speech. In other studies, researchers are investigating links between internal and external speech, that which we say out aloud. So in the last paragraph, he just explains that there is research being done. So now, which brain regions are linked with inner speech, we are being able to identify those. Also, we are being able to investigate the links between internal and external speech. So the first paragraph here basically set up the context that there is inner speech, there is inner voice. It gave us the viewpoints of two famous people on that. Second paragraph gave us further details of inner voice and inner speech and highlighted to us how difficult it is to identify it. What are the problems that we face when we think about inner voice or inner speech? And the third paragraph finally ends on a positive note, is the easiest to understand as well. Basically saying there is research being done and there is progress being made and we are making progress. It does not say how much progress, but there is progress being made when we are understanding inner speech or inner voice. Agreed? So this is what the paragraph, or this is what the passage is about, the three paragraphs. So those of you who are asking how do we summarize paragraphs or how do we summarize the whole RC, this is how we summarize as well. So in this simple short way, we've identified what is the different content in the different paragraphs of the passage, what is it is being talked about, and now we know that this is what the whole passage is about. Clear, everyone? The passage is clear? Let's discuss the questions one by one. Question number 5. The phrase trying to turn up the gas quickly enough to see how darkness looks metaphorically suggests a paradox in the study of. What is the paradox that it suggests? Right? Now here there is a conflict which is being born. So we are trying to do something, right? We are trying to do something, but when we try to do it, right, it gets very difficult to actually implement it, right? So we are going, what is it that we are trying to do? Which is the paradox? Where is the paradox? The paradox here is, what is a paradox first? What is a paradox? Remember, our first step is always to understand what the question is about. So a paradox is essentially a situation where there are opposite ideas and we are not able to resolve, right? There are opposite ideas, we don't know what the solution here is. In this case, what is paradoxical in nature? That when we go to observe, right? When we go to observe how darkness looks, the moment we switch on the light, right? So the moment we make a physical observation, the moment we go to make an observation, the darkness disappears. So there is a contradiction in itself. We want to go and see how darkness looks, but when we try to do that, right, the darkness disappears itself. So the improbability of the task, right? Now in this particular case, which is the option which highlights the paradox? Why did we use, basically is asking you, why did we use this phrase, right? This phrase was basically used to imply, right, that whenever we try to think about, right, inner speech or inner voice, what happens? How do you arrive, or how do you think about inner voice or inner speech? By thinking about thinking. But the moment you do it, right, your thoughts change. The moment you try to establish your inner voice or your inner speech, your thoughts changed. So whenever you try to look at darkness by switching on the light, the nature of the room changes. So when we tried to switch on the light, what is it that we tried to do? Did we try physical observation, conscious observation, direct observation, or empirical research when we turned up the light in the room? What is it that we tried to do? Which out of these acts to get ruled out instantly? When we try to switch on the light, right, it's a physical action or it's a direct observation, agreed? So when we try to turn on the gas light, it's a physical action, right, or it is a direct observation, right? There is no empirical research, data driven research. Empirical is something which is based on data. There is no mention of data, right? So when we go and switch on the light, it's a physical observation. Now in this case, in the case of the light, right, there is physical observation, right? But when it comes to inner voice or inner speech, will we call it physical observation or will we call it direct observation? Will you call it physical or will you call it direct? Is inner voice or inner speech, can it be physical observation? It is not physical in nature, right? So it is direct observation. So for example, I close my eyes, I say, I want to observe what my inner voice or inner speech is. So the moment I try to do that, I am trying to directly observe my inner voice or inner speech. But the moment I do that, I change the thoughts in my head. And hence it gets very difficult. So it's trying to showcase the difference between this phrase, that what happens when you try to directly observe your inner speech, or what happens if you introspectively understand, that you don't force yourself, it just comes to you that this is what inner voice or inner speech is, this is my inner voice or inner speech, right? If you try to force it, it will get difficult, it changes. So this example of turning up the gas light was basically to show you, you try to go and make a direct observation of how darkness looks, you'll not be able to observe it directly. But if you introspect about it, close your eyes, you'll be able to at least have an understanding of this is how darkness looks, or this is the look of darkness. Hence the correct answer, option number C. That's where it gets ruled out. Secondly, metaphysical in this is also incorrect. Metaphysical is things which are not physical, which go beyond the realms of human beings. Say might be related to God or the superpowers. So that also does not make sense. Himang, he is asking us, why does he use this phrase? Right, this phrase, trying to turn up the gas quickly enough to see how darkness looks. Why does he use it? Right, what kind of paradox does he suggest in this case? Why does he use it? So if I have to answer this question directly, can I answer it directly by saying he uses this example to showcase how difficult it is to understand inner voice or inner speech? That you can't understand inner voice or inner speech by directly looking at it, by directly observing it. That is the difficulty, right? Because when you think about it directly, you will get sidetracked by it because your thoughts will change. So the closest to that sentiment, option number C. Hence the correct answer. The primary focus of the passage is Next question. The primary focus of the passage is. Primary focus of the passage. So we should start eliminating answer choices, right? Which is the first one? So the passage is about inner voice, inner speech. Different. The first paragraph gave us the viewpoints of two important people, and the first paragraph explained to us the definition of what inner voice or inner speech is. Second paragraph tells us the problems we face when we look at inner speech, right, or inner voice. Third paragraph tells us about the progress that we've made in the current times, that how we've evolved in our thinking of inner voice or inner speech, and now how scientifically we are beginning to understand it, right? So that is how the passage, the whole passage is structured. Agreed? All of you agree with that? First option that we rule out. Is the passage only about the personal experiences of individuals realizing their consciousness? Is the primary focus about the personal experiences? So then it would be only about Helen Keller and Descartes. Is this about personal experiences, primarily the passage? It's not about personal experiences. So can we rule this out? Those two are just examples of it, right? Next, the methodologies involved in studying non-physical phenomena. Scope trap. What was the scope of our passage? What is the scope of our passage? Scope is inner voice, inner speech. Is it non-physical phenomena? All of non-physical phenomena? No, it isn't, right? We violated the scope of the passage, ruled out. Right? The philosophical underpinnings of consciousness. Again, too wide. Right? The scope is completely changed. This is not about consciousness. This is only about inner voice and inner speech. Right? Philosophical underpinnings would mean all of it. And the last paragraph is not just philosophical underpinnings, it's actually research as well into it. So again, the scope trap is violated. Correct answer, the historical evolution of understanding inner speech, especially helped by the last paragraph. Because it starts from the past and it brings us to the present time of how we are approaching it, or what is it that we think about it presently. Hence, correct answer, option number A. Seventh question. The first paragraph primarily serves to so which is the one? So in the first paragraph, if I look at the different answer choices here, right, in question number 7, right, provide a chronological account of development. Chronological account of development would be time by sequence. It's not given in the first paragraph. First paragraph talks about the viewpoints of two people, right, and what is inner voice, inner speech, ruled out. Illustrate the personal journey of self-realization and its impact. Probable, we can keep it for now, right? So just keeping it as a probable answer choice, right? Option number A, contrast ancient philosophical insights with modern scientific findings. There are no modern scientific findings. There is no contrast in the first paragraph. We are told what Descartes said, what Helen Keller said, what inner voice, inner speech is. Establish the foundational premise of inner speech and consciousness. So when we read B and C, we realize Is it about the foundational premise of inner speech, or is it about journey of self-realization? We can see journey of self-realization takes it all together in a different direction, right? The scope changes, the context changes. This is not what the passage is about. Hence, our correct answer, option number B in the given case. Absolutely, Himankit, can be. चलो सिटर वाला क्वेश्चन 8th आई थिंक है ना, 8th था ना जो सबसे इजी था. So in the context of the passage, it can be inferred that, right? एक एक करके ऑप्शंस देखें. ऑप्शन नंबर ए, इनर स्पीच इज यूनिवर्सली शेयर्ड एंड फिजिकली ऑब्जर्वेबल. इनकरेक्ट फैक्ट. फिजिकली ऑब्जर्वेबल तो नहीं है, काट सकते हैं ऑप्शन नंबर ए को, वो तो इंटेंजिबल है, आप फील कर ही नहीं सकते फिजिकली. रूल्ड आउट. The study of inner speech has remained static over the centuries. Last paragraph में ही हमने progress की बात करी, right? तो वो भी rule out हो गया. See, introspection is a flawed method of understanding complex mental processes. यार ये तो opinion हो गया ना. Introspection की तो actually तारीफ करी गई है passage में. इंट्रोस्पेक्शन इज द वे टू अराइव एट इनर वॉइस और इनर स्पीच, उसको एस्टैब्लिश करने के लिए. सो एक्चुअली इट इज नॉट फ्लॉड, राइट? सी ऑल्सो रूल्ड आउट. द नेचर ऑफ इनर स्पीच इज इल्यूसिव बट इंक्रीजिंगली अंडरस्टूड थ्रू मॉडर्न रिसर्च. इल्यूसिव है, पहले 2 पैराग्राफ्स में हमने बात करी, लास्ट में हम उसको ज्यादा समझने लग गए हैं, राइट? सो इट मेक्स सेंस, है ना? लास्ट में इट इज अंडरस्टूड थ्रू मॉडर्न रिसर्च. Hence the correct answer, option number D. Just reiterating it. Question number 9. ये वाला tricky है यार. Question number 9. Considering the author's analytical approach and content, a plausible profession. So पहली चीज तो इसमें हमेशा होता है plausible profession, possible profession, right? हम plausible या possible profession क्यों बोलते हैं? क्योंकि दुनिया में कोई भी बंदा किसी भी चीज पे लिख सकता है. दुनिया में कोई भी बंदा किसी भी चीज के ऊपर लिख सकता है. एग्रीड? कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शन नहीं है. जैसे मेरे, आई एम नॉट अ मेजर इन इकोनॉमिक्स बट आई कैन राइट एन आर्टिकल ऑन इकोनॉमिक्स. हम लोग कंटेंट से लिंक अप करते हैं कि कंटेंट कौन सा मोस्ट सूटेबल है, राइट? सो अब एक एक करके इसमें हम ऑप्शंस को रूल आउट करेंगे. लिंग्विस्ट फोकसिंग ऑन द सिमेंटिक्स ऑफ सेल्फ अवेयरनेस, राइट? सो अ लिंग्विस्ट, हिज जॉब इज टू डील विद लैंग्वेजेस एंड हाउ लैंग्वेजेस डेवलप. Semantics is essentially your structure, right? Is the language, right? Semantics would here imply the language of self-awareness, right? Now in this particular case, in this passage, are we concerned with the language of self-awareness? Right? The terms used, the language used, the linguistics used, right? So this would imply our focus is on the language aspect of it. Now, is the last paragraph of the passage, or are all the paragraphs of the passage, are they talking about what is inner speech or inner voice, or are they talking about the meaning of these words, inner speech, inner voice, how did they arrive in our language? How did we start using them in our language? What is the focus? The focus is what is inner voice, inner speech. It's not on the semantics, it's not on the language structures. Hi, Anonymous. So it's definitely not on these things. So ruled out. Option number D gets ruled out, right? Next, historian of psychology tracing the evolution of ideas. A historian of psychology tracing the evolution of ideas would then depend upon when did particular ideas take birth. He's not delving into what those ideas are. He's delving into when did those ideas take birth, what happened when. He's a historian of psychology. He's telling us that this happened in psychology, this particular idea took place then. Is the passage a chronology of those things? Are we concerned about the chronology of inner voice or inner speech? Is the passage focused on the chronology, the time sequences, when did particular things happen? Again, that is not the focus here. The focus is on meaning. What is inner voice? What is inner speech? Do we have methods to evaluate it? Can we understand it? Can we understand the science behind it? Right? Ruled out. Now, between A and B, a philosopher can also talk about these things, and a cognitive scientist. A cognitive scientist is someone who works on the processes of cognition. Cognition is our processes of thinking, ones related with our mind, the way we think. Can I say this? Inner voice and inner speech is all about thinking. One, it does belong to the field of thinking, right? Now, a cognitive scientist researching language and thought, right? Remember, the last paragraph of the passage is your biggest help in this case. Was this passage only the first two paragraphs, right? Then option number A becomes a very, very tricky option, right? Because it talks about philosophy, right? But last paragraph tells us that there is an element of science, there is research being talked about. The author is now heading into the direction of the results, what has happened in the brain, which areas are linked to inner voice or inner speech. So those are all the domains of which particular field? Cognitive science, the science of thinking. So that is where our clue lies in this case. Secondly, with the first option, the mind-body problem, right? The mind-body problem is the distinction between the human mind and the human body. Are they one? Are they separate entities? Is this passage about mind-body problem? The passage is not about the mind-body problem. So that's the second mistake in option number 1. So hence our correct answer, option number B, the closest we can get in this case. So this is a tough one. This is the closest we can get to an answer here. Next question, 10th, last question. Based on the passage, it suggested that yes, Himank, we can rule out D. Now let's go by the options one by one. Inner voice and external speech are entirely unrelated aspects of communication. Are they entirely unrelated aspects of communication, or actually we don't know whether they are related or not? we actually don't know the relationship between inner voice and external speech, right? And that relationship actually in the research, right, in the last paragraph of the passage, he mentions there is research being done linking the two, inner voice and external speech. Remember the last paragraph? So this gets ruled out, right? Now, without the inner voice, one's consciousness would be akin to non-existence. Option number C. What is the problem with option number C? There is one problem, and this is now based on logic. This is type 5, right? Remember the different kinds of errors we did? So there were some logical errors as well. So this is a logical error in option number C. Can you pick up that logical error? Option number C, I think Rishita gave that answer. If you think very closely about it, we actually don't know what happens to one's consciousness without inner voice. We have no answer for it. We don't know. The passage really does not discuss it. The passage tells us that I existed when I came to realize my inner voice or inner speech. But what happens when one does not have an inner voice or inner speech? We don't know. That is not the subject of the passage. There is no information for it. Whether existence is non-existence or not, or is there something else, we don't know. Not discussed in the passage what happens in that particular case. What is discussed is when I have my inner voice, I discover who I am. So ruled out, right? Option number A, problem. There is problem with one word in option number A. Option number A commits the mistake of changing one word. Is inner voice tangible or is it intangible? Tangible. Tangible is something you can physically feel. Is it tangible? Is it a tangible guide? Something that you can feel, observe, see, like physically feel? You can't do that, right? It's actually intangible. So manipulation of words, another trick employed. Intangible changed to tangible. So how many options are we left with? One option. The study of inner voice is an introspective journey leading to more questions than answers, right? Great. So how many did you get right out of 10, guys? How many did you get right out of 10 questions? So we covered in today's session, I think we are close to 3 hours now since we started, and we've covered an extensive set of, I think, guiding principles, guiding rules, right? We won't treat them as rules, but we've had 6 guidelines that we can adopt for elimination of answer choices, things that we can do to improve our reading skills, things we've discussed, how to analyze passages, how to summarize them. We also had that African philosopher, philosophy in Africa passage, where we learned how is it that we should read by making substitutions. So these are all different things that we covered in today's session. A lot of diverse things covered, right? I'll take Himang's question. Question 8 also talk about. Question number, sir, option B also talk about the question. The study of inner voice is an introspective journey leading to more questions than answers, right? When he says more questions than answers, that means it raises a lot of doubts. The meaning of that sentence is inner voice, it leads to a lot of doubts, right? Which is what it does, right? Because then you begin to ask yourself, what is inner voice? What does it mean? How do I arrive at it? You have all these questions in your mind. It's not easy to find those answers. Remember the second paragraph, how difficult it is to find answers about one's inner voice? So he's just trying to highlight that difficulty. So there's this vast set of information that we covered in today's session. I hope you guys learned a lot of things. There were some very, very useful pointers thrown in every now and then, and We analyze these questions, we analyze these different pointers related to RCs. How do you arrive at those answers? How do you use elimination to get to these answers? So I hope you guys had a great time today. This was a great class and great set of individuals, and all of you, I would like to praise all of you for the interaction and the fact that you stayed for 3 hours and you kept solving questions. VRC can get boring, right? But you guys were like really at it. You answered all the questions, participated actively. So thank you very much for doing that, and I hope it was a great and pleasant learning experience for you guys and you enjoyed the session today. Do leave your comments, do leave your feedback in the comment section, and I hope you had a great time today. Thank you very much for joining me today and being a part of the session. It was lovely teaching you guys. See you guys pretty soon in the next session whenever we have one. Great guys. Good evening everyone, and great to have all of you. So what's the different author opinions? Explain them. Shavni, different author opinions, it depends what is it that the author is trying to portray through the passage. Authors would have different purposes, right? They would want to achieve different things while writing articles, right? So there are different author opinions are basically these different objectives that authors have. Some of them, in some occasions they would like to convince you of something, somewhere they would like to debate something, somewhere they will like to highlight something. So these are all different author opinions that they can have depending upon the passage, right? Primarily they are either trying to convince you of something, right? Or they are setting up a debate, right? Or they are trying to portray that you should not believe in something. So based on those content, you'll have these different author opinions, and you should try to spot these with these words. Wherever they use these strong words, you'll be able to establish this is what the author is trying to do, this is what he's trying to prove. Great guys, great to have all of you here today. Thank you very much and for being here today and being a part of the session. See you guys next time.